on this 5th week of Lent for our series, The Crossroads. Tonight's theme is obedience. Our Old Testament reading is from Psalm 119, verses 1 through 8. The epistle reading is Ephesians chapter 4, 1 through 6. And the gospel reading, which I'll read for you tonight, is from Matthew, the 26th chapter, verses 36 to 46. Again, due to the length of the recordings allowed, we ask you to read the other lessons on your own. But the gospel reading from St. Matthew is here. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So you could not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you do not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the 2nd time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." This is the gospel of our Lord. Crossroads. We've been talking about them for weeks now. We know that they are there for all of us. We may move along from day to day easily, walking in the sunshine, enjoying the view, feeling at peace, and then, as we all know in the last few weeks, a crossroads comes, a choice point, and things change. Then we stand there frozen to the spot. Which way now? Right, left, straight? What waits for each of those choices down that road we're unaware of. Which way does our heart call us to go? Which makes sense? Which is God's way? The answers are not always easy. A crossroads can bring a daunting spiritual pain, and it can bring us to our knees. It can even bring us to destruction. Today we consider an expert on the crossroad of obedience, John. The disciple that Jesus loved was there in the garden when Jesus faced that crossroads in the garden. John was in the garden with Jesus, but he certainly did not know what was going on. Jesus went away to pray, and he asked the disciples to pray with him, to pray for him. The disciples could tell that Jesus was struggling. But after the meal, after the cup of wine that they had drank with the Passover meal, after the walk in the garden in the dark, the disciples were tired and they just couldn't keep their eyes open. They fell asleep. It was not unusual for the disciples to go off as a group and to join in prayer as Jesus prayed. Sometimes as he prayed off a little ways away from them. So this was normal in their patterns. It happened often. Jesus was praying many times as they traveled with him. The disciples just didn't know what was going on there in the garden that night. Jesus was facing the most difficult crossroad of his life. He was staring at the reality of suffering that he would have to endure, facing the cross, and most terribly, as he knew, he would be facing it alone. Jesus was often tempted in his life to step away from God's plan for him. Satan harassed Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days. And again, he said, there's a way out, a way to avoid suffering. He told him back in the wilderness, just bow down and worship me, and I will give all this to you. That was Satan's tempt. But this time in the garden, Satan was offering another temptation, a shortcut to avoid the cross. But Jesus sent the devil away and clung to the path that God had set for him. So what does this mean, this fifth Wednesday in Lent? What does this mean for our lives today? Well, it should inspire us. When we are faced with a crossroad of our life, oh, not that the weight of the world rests on our complete shoulders, it doesn't, but with our own heart in conflict over which way to go as decisions are made, that crossroad, every time we come to the place where we hear the voice inside of us wondering, look, you know what will happen if you choose the way of God? You may be hurt. You may be excluded. You might be scorned. You might be persecuted. And every time that we stand at a crossroad, as we face any decision, we need to remember Jesus. And that he faced crossroads as well, and the path that he chose to take. In those years after Jesus ascended, all who followed, all who wanted to be a Christian and follow his ways, faced the choice to follow or deny him, publicly as well as privately. If they denied him, they could escape all the threats, the persecution, even the death that they faced because of knowing him and following him. Jesus' followers were outcast from society. They were rejected by many, and they were often threatened with suffering and death. God helped them to remain faithful. In John's book of Revelation, it says, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. And for 10 days you will have tribulations. But be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life." Now we might say, well, we're not persecuted. We don't face that kind of a crossroad. But actually, we do. We face the crossroad of obedience every time that we confront a choice that asks, will we follow our own way? Will we follow the way of the world? Will we follow the way that others push us at times? Will we follow the way we think would be the easiest or most pleasant for us? Or will we follow the way that Jesus would lead us, the way of obedience? Those kinds of choices happen every day. And that is why we need the power and presence of God's Spirit every day, especially in these days. That's what Jesus was doing there in the garden and on the cross. He was bringing forgiveness forgiveness and new life to us here. By God's power and the sacrifice of Jesus, we begin each day new and forgiven, new and able to make a choice of obedience. Jesus said, "Abide in me, and I in you." The same Jesus who struggled there in the garden, the one who went to the cross, the one who rose, is right here in our hearts, with us at our crossroads as we make decisions and choices throughout life. These are words of encouragement. Help us to remember and rejoice for what Jesus has done and what he will do in and through us.